Hello, I'm Kevin from Springfield Leather.
I'm Denny from Springfield Leather.
We are your happy little leather twins here today. We're going to talk about an introduction to leather crafting and the means of leather stamping and tooling. And this is going to be fairly short and fairly basic, but we're going to tell you a couple of things that are just super important, especially if you're a beginner or if you're relatively new to the world of stamping on leather work. Then there's a couple of points here that you want to remember and stamp them on your forehead or something, because they're really important. We're not going to get into the swivel knife today, not going to get into carving, just basically bunk.
Just stamping.
Stamping.
Yes, stamping.
Okay. Here's the first thing. If you want to start out this wonderful, wacky world of leather stamping, you have to have a good surface to work on. By that, I mean a granite slab like I have here in front of me. I do not mean a board. That doesn't work. A good solid old table doesn't work. A workbench, wood, doesn't work.
Formica doesn't work.
It's horrible. It's less than good. A cement floor is bad. A concrete windowsill, it's not good. I'm trying to make a point here. It requires a granite slab or a marble slab. Now you could use steel, but that's not happy because steel reacts with wet leather and it turns it black, and it's not all that happy.
A retired tombstone.
A retired tombstone? How do you retire a tombstone?
I guess you can.
Okay. That works. You can go to a granite works, place that sells countertops. Typically they'll give you a little piece for free. It needs to be 1.25 inches thick minimum. It's better if it's thicker, but hey, you got to take what you can get. Second thing, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. The second most important thing about starting with leather stamping is the moisture content of your leather. These two things are really kind of critical. Everything else depends on this. If your leather doesn't have the right amount of moisture in it, things are not as happy as they might otherwise be. To give you an idea, I have this happy little container of water here. This is, for the most part, the wrong way to wet your leather. Now, there's very little that's written in stone in the leather world.
Everybody used to talk about casing their leather, which meant to
Yes.
soak it like that and put it in the refrigerator overnight.
Yeah, and you can still do that, which is kind of why I'm saying there's not a lot that's written in stone. If you want to take your little square foot piece of leather, dip it in a sink full of cool water until it stops oozing bubbles, and then place it in you take it out, you let it set for about 5 minutes, then you place it in a garbage sack, wrap it up, stick it in your refrigerator overnight, take it out the next day, and you can tool on it. Well, who wants to do that?
Plus, when you take it out, after you've had it in the refrigerator, it's still got all that moisture in it. You have to let it dry back out.
Yeah. So anyway, we've gotten our happy little piece of leather a little extra wet, as you probably can see, and we're going to come back to that. Now, in the meantime, to get your leather wet, for me, it's a sponge or a spray bottle. I'm going to get this thing wet. So here's the tricky part. Everybody says, well, how much water do I put on my leather? How wet do I get it?
Not as wet as most people think.
Okay.
But it's something you have to experiment with.
Yeah, there's no way, there's no answer to that question. you have to get it wet. It has to be good and wet, just not soaked. You probably don't need to wet it from the back. If it starts going up through the leather from the back, more than likely it's going to be too wet. So get it good and wet on the top, similar to what I did, and fairly immediately that leather, well, within a minute or two, will start getting back to its natural color. Now there's something interesting about when you wet leather. When you put cold water on a piece of cool leather and you lay your hand right above it barely, it gives off heat. And that's because the fibers are expanding so fast that it creates friction and it gives off heat. Typically, when that leather is no longer giving off heat and it's cool to the touch, then it's ready to stamp and carve. Make sense?
I agree 100%.
All right.
And most people like to stamp and carve with their leather too wet.
Yes.
You're better off having to re-wet your leather every once in a while than get it overly wet and then deal with it, because most of your stuff will turn to mush.
How long have you been doing this?
Well, you've been doing it for like 70 years, and
I have not been doing it for 7 years. All right.
I've been doing it quite a while.
Yes. So both of us have some experience, and we've done some leather work. I'd like to show you the difference between, see if I can find a happy little tool here. Oh, here's the perfect one. Here's a parashader. Now, by the way, do you remember the first two most important things that I told you? They are, just for review, the granite slab and moisture content. Now, when you, let's use this one instead. When you take a stamping tool, you need to hold it straight up and down, and you hold it like this. You don't hold it like that. You hold it like this at an angle, thumb and your fingers. You don't hold it like this because you whack your fingers and it hurts. You don't hold it like this because you can't see what you're doing. You hold it about in the middle, and I'm going to put this down here and I'm going to hit it. Matter of fact, I'm going to hit it twice. Can I hit it again?
If you want to.
All right,
Kevin.
We'll hit it 3 times. Pretty simple, easy to do. Stamped impressions are clear. They look good with my happy little camouflage tool. Here's what it looks like when your leather's too wet. Not so good. And somebody that has a little experience can look at your leather work, and if you ever want to send us a picture, we can probably look at it and tell you whether you have the right amount of water in your leather when you're working on it or not. Here's when it's too dry. Not so happy.
Leather has a lot of qualities like clay does.
It does.
When you work a piece of clay, you don't work it when it's dry.
That's right. If it's too
hard.
dry,
But when it's
work.
wet, you can make impressions in it, and then when it dries, it will stay that way.
right. And when it's too wet, it's mushy, just like this. So if you think of your leather as clay to some extent, it'll be a little easier to have success. Now, the first 2 important things, you remember, the marble or granite slab and the moisture content. It's a really good thing to have a decent mallet. A wood mallet works, but when you hit it, it leaves little chips down in those impressions after a while, and they're very difficult to get out. And that wouldn't bother me so much, except that if I'm going to put antiquing over it, it doesn't absorb where those wood chips are. So when you pick them out, you got white spots all over the place.
Can you please come to Emma's office? Chris, to Emma's office?
Now, I just love our intercom system,
too.
don't you? It saves me so many steps. A third or fourth thing, I don't remember which.
Third, we're working on the third.
Okay, when you stamp on leather, there's one thing that will help you if you're a beginner quite a bit. Work with a good piece of leather. Otherwise, it's like trying to learn guitar playing on a really lousy guitar. It's not happy, it hurts your fingers, and it usually doesn't sound very good. There's many import leathers that are wonderful and fine, and you can make a great product out of them, and they stamp fine, they look great. There's other leathers that are better, and most of you, if you've done business with Springfield leather before, you probably know I'm a little bit
biased.
I'm a little biased towards Herman oak leather because as far as I'm concerned, it stamps and tools like no other. But that's enough of a promo on that.
Another thing that they need to know, it needs to be a vegetable tan leather.
It does have to
They
be
can't,
vegetable tan.
they can't stamp well at all on a piece of chrome tanned leather.
Right. So for you beginners, veg tanned leather absorbs water, chrome tanned leather does not. Need water, otherwise not happy. Okay, how do we want to just start with something simple, Denny?
Yeah,
What do you
let's just do a simple pattern. I'll use 2 different tools and a pair of wing dividers.
got? Okay.
Let's just put a border on this piece of leather right here. Just a border on each side. Then let's find the center of it. And we'll put a center line on it.
So you ran one line down one side, one in the middle. Okay,
Okay.
so that's what we've got. I don't know if that's visible or not, but that's it.
Okay, now let's just set our wing dividers at just a random length here. To go about like this, and down on the center, I'm gonna mark that center.
And by the way, while Denny's marking this, one thing nice to know if you're just starting out, leather work does not have to be perfect. All it has to be is kind of good. You're going to make mistakes, period. That's just the way it is. My first belt was horrible, horrible. And if yours is horrible, here's a solution. Dye it black and give it to Uncle Frank. He'll say, "Oh, you made that for me." That's what he's probably going to say. He'll love it.
Okay.
Where are we at next?
Uncle Frank doesn't have to know anything, by the way.
I forgot how many things I gave him.
I know. And I think you were aiming that directly at me, too. Okay, now I'm going to take this simple little tool here.
This is just a little.
It's what we call a set stamp, which means you set it on the leather and stamp it.
Oof. There's a complication for you.
Okay, I'm just going to start on one of those marks and stamp it. And then I'm going to go to the next mark.
That one
and
was
stamp
not perfect.
it. Oh, Kevin, Uncle Frank won't know.
Especially when it's black, huh?
Right, that's right. Okay, now I've stamped all those marks.
That's pretty simple.
That's very simple. And it doesn't look all that bad either.
No, that's the key. If you can remember, keeping things simple is a very, very good thing. So this is simple.
Okay, now I'm going to take this other tool. These are the only 2 tools I'm going to use in this whole pattern. And I'm going to go on that border line that I made. And I'm just going to go back to back on that. Uncle Frank wouldn't even notice that I got my border line a little close to the edge.
You know, why don't you show them what you can do about that? Maybe just a little. Or here, I can.
You show them, Kevin.
Okay, that looks good. If you wish, you see Denny's stamp is just a tiny bit close to this edge up here. Well, that's okay. Really, it's not going to matter. It's still going to look good when you're done. If you want to, you can just lean that tool back just a little bit. It's still kind of close.
Oh, so it doesn't go over the edge.
Right. And, you know, that's a horrible border, Denny.
Let's go down here a little ways and make that border a little bit
Oh, no, you
wider.
mean you're going to make more mistakes here?
Yeah, I'm going to make
This is
another
a
mistake.
Perfect example.
See what I did now? I've got 2 lines on the outside.
And
But-
guess what's going to happen? It's going to work.
It's going to work fine.
See, that's a really good lesson because, man, people, we answer so many questions here about leatherwork, and normally they're in conjunction with, I made a mistake here, or I did this wrong. What can I do to fix it? Well, again, there's no rules that are written in stone, but if you want to stamp on leather and start out in leatherwork, you're going to realize soon enough there's a lot of things you can do to correct mistakes. And there's a lot of mistakes you're probably going to have to correct.
There was a carpenter, when I was a carpenter, I had a boss that I would say, man, I messed that up. And he would say, that's okay, the painter can take care of it.
Yep.
And everything, almost everything, you can overcome mistakes, you know, and if you integrate your mistakes into what you're doing, a lot of times it'll turn out better than it was before.
I'd like to show one thing here real quick. You know, there's a lot of water that I just put on that piece of leather. But there's one thing about practice. Once you learn how much water it takes to make this thing ready for stamping, you can start work really quick. Where'd that little tool go that I started with? Here it is. This is just a camouflage tool. And this is simple. No border line. And it's always easier if you use a border line. But again, it's one of those things that you just don't have to do. You can even stick your tool right back in the same impression and hit it again, and you'll be just fine.
A lot of people are really afraid of hitting their tool too hard.
I know.
And they don't make a nice crisp impression.
It will
but
bounce.
Like you just said, you can put it back in that same impression and hit it again.
Yeah, and you can kind of see, you know, you could finish that belt up right there, antique it, maybe dye the edges dark and antique this thing, and that would make a fine, fine belt. It would hold your pants up and it would wear really well.
Yeah.
And how long did I have to leave that leather set before you could work on it? Not long. One thing you'll want to be conscious of is your fingernails. If you're stamping on leather and you're new at this, make sure your fingernails on the hand you hold the tool with are short, because you'll have fingernail marks all over. The leather takes impressions from anything that's pressed into it. It's simple.
It's leather stamping is a very simple thing. Most people make more out of it than they need to. The thing is just practice. You know,
That's
every little scrap of leather you can get, practice on it. Do something with it.
Yeah.
And there are so many things you can do with one tool. Most people don't realize you can make more than one design with one tool.
You know, that's interesting that you would mention that, because, you know, if you take this same tool and you just turn it upside down every other time. Now, this is not my favorite design. Kind of bounced it a little bit there. But it makes an okay border. And when you apply the same principle to other tools as well, man, you can come up with all kinds of things.
Sky's the limit.
Yeah, it really is. You know, and when you especially, you can do a lot with a camouflage tool. Now, I don't know.
That would make a great belt.
It would make a good belt. If you run it down the center, have you got a center line here?
Not on that one.
How do you work this thing? Well, we're gonna make it a center line. We hope. Well, it's not quite perfect, but it's close. Then we're going to talk about simple. I'm going to run this so the inside of the tool is right down on that center line. We're going to turn it over.
Made it a little meandering.
You get a little squiggle thing there. Again,
That's great.
simplicity, experiment. Make sure you have a granite slab. Make sure your moisture content is adequate. Remember, you probably don't need to soak it. You gotta have water in it. If it's too dry, it doesn't work. Have we rattled long enough, or do we want to go on?
I think that's the basics of stamping right there. We could go on forever, and you folks, you will be learning forever. That's for sure. Every time you do something, you will learn something
Do
new.
you realize how many people we would bore to tears?
Most of you.
Okay, well, that's it for us.